The sound of Pearl Johnston's sobbing cut through the evening air like a knife through silk, and Samuel Lawson heard it from 50 yards away as he guided his horse toward the creek that bordered his ranch in Eager, Arizona territory. It was late August in 1883, and the desert heat still clung to the land even as the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains. Samuel had been checking the fence lines along the eastern edge of his property when he first caught sight of the young woman kneeling by the water's edge, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. He recognized her immediately, even from a distance. Pearl Johnston had arrived in Eager 3 months earlier with her father, a widower who had purchased the small mercantile on Main Street after the previous owner had died without heirs. She was 22 years old, with dark auburn hair that caught the light like polished copper, and eyes the color of sage in spring. Samuel had seen her in town a handful of times, had tipped his hat and exchanged pleasantries, but nothing more. At 26, he had devoted the past 5 years to building his ranch from nothing, and there had been precious little time for courting. But hearing her cry like that, with such raw desperation, struck something deep in his chest. He dismounted and approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. His boots crunched on the dry grass and she looked up, her face streaked with tears, her cheeks flushed red. "Miss Johnston," Samuel removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "Are you hurt? Is someone troubling you?" She tried to compose herself, wiping at her face with the back of her hand, but fresh tears spilled over almost immediately. "I am sorry, Mr. Lawson. I did not mean to trespass on your land. I was just walking and then I realized it was gone, and I have been searching for over an hour, but I cannot find it anywhere." "What is gone?" He knelt down beside her, his voice gentle. "My locket." Her voice broke on the word. "It was my mother's. She died when I was 10 years old, and it is the only thing I have left of her. The chain must have broken while I was walking. I have retraced my steps a dozen times, but the grass is so thick here, and the light is fading, and I cannot find it." Samuel looked out across the landscape. The creek ran through a shallow valley, bordered on both sides by tall grass and scattered juniper trees. The ground was uneven, full of rocks and rabbit holes and 1,000 places where a small piece of jewelry could disappear forever. The sun was already touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In another 30 minutes it would be full dark. "Tell me what it looks like," he said. Pearl drew a shaky breath. "It is silver, about this big." She made a circle with her thumb and forefinger, perhaps 1.5 inches across. "It has a design on the front, a rose with leaves, and it opens. Inside there is a tiny portrait of my mother. It is all I have to remember her face by." Samuel stood and scanned the area. "You said you were walking. Where did you start from?" She pointed back toward the road that ran between his property and the Johnston place, about a mile east. "I came from town. I was taking the long way home because it was such a beautiful evening and I wanted to think. My father and I had an argument this morning about something foolish, and I needed to clear my head. I walked along the road, then cut across your property here to get to the creek. I stopped at the water to rest, and when I stood up to leave, I reached for my locket like I always do, and it was not there." "So somewhere between the road and here," Samuel said, measuring the distance with his eyes. "It was at least 300 yards of rough terrain." "That is a lot of ground to cover. I know." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "It is hopeless, is it not? I will never find it. My mother is truly gone now." "Now that is not true." Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort that felt both natural and terrifying at the same time. He had never been good with crying women. He had 3 older sisters, but they had all married and moved away before he left home to seek his fortune out west. I will help you look. I know this land better than anyone, and I have good eyes. We will find your locket, Miss Johnston. I give you my word." She looked up at him, hope and doubt warring in her expression. "But the sun is setting. You will never find it in the dark." "Then I will search until dawn if I have to," Samuel said, and he meant it. There was something about the way she looked at him, something about the raw pain in her voice that made him want to move mountains for her. "Why do you not go on home? Your father will be worried." "I will search tonight, and if I have not found it by morning, I will search again tomorrow." "I cannot ask you to do that." Pearl shook her head vehemently. "You have your own work to do, your cattle and horses and whatever else needs tending. I cannot ask you to spend the night searching for something that might be impossible to find." "You did not ask. I offered." Samuel gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Besides, my foreman can handle the morning chores. This is important. I can see how much that locket means to you." Pearl bit her lip, and for a moment he thought she might argue further. Instead, she said, "Then let me help. I can stay and search with you. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Samuel shook his head. "Your father will worry himself sick if you are not home before full dark. Go back to town, Miss Johnston. Tell him what happened. If he is agreeable, you can come back in the morning to help me continue the search. But tonight, let me do this for you." She hesitated, clearly torn between accepting his offer and her desire to keep searching herself. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but please, Mr. Lawson, if you find it, be careful with it. The hinge is delicate and the portrait inside is fragile." "I will treat it like the treasure it is," Samuel promised. "Now go on before it gets any darker. Do you have a horse?" "No, I walked from town." "Then take mine. His name is Ranger, and he is gentle as a lamb. Ride him back to your father's place. I will come by tomorrow to collect him, whether I have found the locket or not." Pearl looked at the big bay gelding, then back at Samuel. "Are you certain? How will you get home?" "I will walk. It is only a mile to my house from here, and I know every rock and hole between here and there. I could walk it blindfolded." After a moment, Pearl nodded. She allowed him to help her mount, her skirts awkward on the saddle, but she adjusted them with practiced ease. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I do not know how to repay your kindness. Just get home safe," he said. "That is payment enough." He watched until she disappeared over the rise, heading toward the road and town beyond. Then he turned back to the creek and the vast expanse of land he had promised to search. The sun had dipped below the mountains now, and the light was fading fast. Samuel took a deep breath and began walking back toward the road, his eyes scanning the ground with the intensity of a hawk hunting prey. The first hour was the hardest. The last of the daylight faded quickly, and though the stars came out bright and clear, their light was not nearly enough to search by effectively. Samuel went back to his house, collected a lantern and matches, and returned to the creek. He started at the point where Pearl said she had first noticed the locket was missing, then worked his way slowly back toward the road, sweeping the lantern back and forth in careful arcs. The grass was thick and dry, parched from the summer heat, despite the nearby creek. Every flash of reflected light made his heart jump, but each time it turned out to be a piece of quartz or mica, a fragment of broken glass, even once the eye of a startled rabbit that bounded away into the darkness. The ground was littered with small objects that caught the light, and Samuel examined each one carefully before moving on. His back began to ache from bending over, and his eyes burned from the strain of searching in the dim light. He thought about Pearl's face, the way her tears had cut tracks through the dust on her cheeks, the desperation in her voice when she spoke about her mother. He had lost his own mother 2 years ago to pneumonia, and though he still had his father and sisters, he understood that unique pain of grief, the way it could ambush you at unexpected moments. The moon rose, a waxing crescent that provided a little more light but not much. Samuel refilled his lantern from the can of kerosene he had brought and continued his search. He worked in a grid pattern, covering every foot of ground between the creek and the road, then expanded his search to the north and south, in case Pearl had misremembered her exact path. Around midnight, he sat down on a large rock to rest. His legs trembled with fatigue and his throat was dry. He had brought water and drank deeply, washing down a piece of jerky he had stuffed in his pocket before leaving the house. The night was quiet except for the gentle burbling of the creek and the occasional call of a nighthawk. He thought about giving up, going home to get a few hours of sleep and starting again at first light. But then he remembered his promise. Until dawn, he had said. He was a man of his word. Samuel pushed himself back to his feet and continued searching. He moved slowly, methodically, refusing to let fatigue make him careless. The locket was small, and it would be easy to miss if he moved too quickly. He thought about Pearl as he walked, about the way her hair caught the light, the sadness in her eyes. He wondered what kind of argument she had had with her father, wondered if it had been resolved. He wondered if she was sleeping now, or if she was lying awake worrying about her lost locket. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Samuel's lantern guttered and died, and he refilled it again. His back ached, his feet hurt, and his eyes felt like they were full of sand. But he kept searching. He covered the same ground twice, 3 times, approaching from different angles, hoping a change in perspective might reveal what he had missed before. Dawn began to break around 5 in the morning, the eastern sky lightening to pale gray, then pink, then gold. Samuel had been searching for almost 9 hours, and he had covered every inch of ground between the creek and the road multiple times. He was beginning to feel the first real stirrings of despair. What if the locket was truly lost? What if a bird had carried it away, or it had fallen into a rabbit hole too deep to see? What if he had already walked past it a dozen times in the darkness and simply could not see it? He rubbed his eyes and looked around, trying to see the landscape with fresh perspective. The sun was just beginning to peek over the mountains to the east, sending long golden rays across the valley. Samuel turned to face the light, shading his eyes, and that was when he saw it. About 20 feet to his left, near a small cluster of prickly pear cactus, something glinted in the new sunlight. It was so small that he almost dismissed it as another piece of quartz, but something made him walk over for a closer look. He knelt down, his heart suddenly pounding, and there it was. The locket. It had fallen into a small depression in the ground, partially hidden by a tuft of grass. The chain was broken, just as Pearl had guessed. The delicate link snapped in 2 places. The locket itself was scratched and dirty, but intact. Samuel picked it up with trembling fingers, hardly daring to believe he had actually found it. He brushed the dirt away gently and examined it in the growing light. The rose design on the front was beautiful, the engraving delicate and detailed. Samuel carefully opened the locket, and there inside was the tiny portrait Pearl had described. The woman in the picture was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with the same dark auburn hair as her daughter and a gentle smile. He could see the resemblance immediately, the same shape to the eyes, the same curve of the cheek. Samuel closed the locket carefully and held it tight in his fist. Relief washed over him so powerfully that he felt his knees go weak. He had found it. After 9 hours of searching, he had actually found it. He could not wait to see Pearl's face when he returned it to her. He made his way back to his house, his exhaustion forgotten in the rush of triumph. He washed his face and hands, changed into clean clothes, and tucked the locket carefully into his shirt pocket. Then he saddled his other horse, a gray mare named Silver, and rode into town. Eager was just beginning to wake up as he arrived. The sun was fully up now, promising another hot day. A few shopkeepers were opening their doors, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Samuel rode directly to the mercantile, where he knew Pearl and her father lived in the rooms above the store. He tied Silver to the hitching post and knocked on the door that led to the upstairs living quarters. After a moment, he heard footsteps, and then the door opened. Pearl stood there, still in her nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose and tousled from sleep. Her eyes were red and swollen as if she had been crying recently. When she saw Samuel, surprise and hope flashed across her face in equal measure. "Mr. Lawson, I did not expect you so early. Did you find it?" The words tumbled out in a rush, and she gripped the edge of the door so tightly her knuckles turned white. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out the locket. He held it out to her, the broken chain dangling from his fingers. "I told you I would search until dawn. I am a man of my word." Pearl made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and reached for the locket with shaking hands. She held it to her chest, tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy, not grief. "You found it. I cannot believe you actually found it. I was so afraid it was gone forever." "I will not lie, it took me most of the night," Samuel admitted. "But I found it about 20 feet from where you had stopped at the creek, near a stand of prickly pear. The chain is broken in 2 places, but the locket itself is undamaged and the portrait inside is safe." Pearl opened the locket and looked at her mother's face, fresh tears spilling over. Thank you so much. I do not have words for what this means to me. You gave up your whole night to search for this. You must be exhausted." "It was worth it to see you smile," Samuel said, and he was surprised to realize how much he meant it. Pearl looked up at him, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. In the soft morning light, with her hair down and her face open and vulnerable, she was the most beautiful woman Samuel had ever seen. Something passed between them in that moment, something electric and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "Would you like to come up for breakfast?" Pearl asked softly. "It is the least I can do after what you have done for me. My father will want to thank you as well." Samuel had not eaten a proper meal since yesterday's supper, and his stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Pearl laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that made Samuel's heart skip. "I will take that as a yes," she said. "Give me a few minutes to get dressed and I will come down and let you in properly." She disappeared back up the stairs, and Samuel waited by the door, suddenly aware of how filthy and exhausted he must look. He tried to brush some of the dust off his clothes, but it was a losing battle. A few minutes later, Pearl reappeared, now dressed in a simple blue calico dress with her hair pinned up neatly. She ushered him up the stairs to the living quarters above the store. The rooms were small but clean and well kept. Lace curtains hung in the windows, and the furniture, while worn, was polished to a shine. An older man emerged from one of the back rooms, wiping sleep from his eyes. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and the same sage-green eyes as his daughter. "Father, this is Mr. Samuel Lawson," Pearl said, her voice bright with excitement. "He found my locket. He searched all night until dawn and found it." Thomas Johnston's eyebrows shot up, and he crossed the room to shake Samuel's hand warmly. "Is that so?" "Pearl told me about losing it yesterday evening, and I could see how much it pained her. That was very kind of you, young man, very kind indeed." "It was no trouble, sir," Samuel said, though his aching back and burning eyes said otherwise. "I was glad I could help." "Well, you must stay for breakfast," Thomas insisted. "Pearl, make us a good meal. Mr. Lawson has earned it." Pearl set to work in the small kitchen while Samuel and Thomas sat at the table. The older man asked about Samuel's ranch, and they talked easily about cattle and horses and the challenges of making a living in the Arizona territory. Samuel found himself relaxing despite his exhaustion. Thomas Johnston was an easy man to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a sharp mind. Pearl served them eggs and bacon, fresh bread with butter, and strong coffee. It was simple fare, but after a night of searching with nothing but jerky and water, it tasted like a feast to Samuel. He ate gratefully, aware of Pearl's eyes on him from time to time. Every time he looked up and met her gaze, she would smile, and he would feel that strange electric current again. "So, Mr. Lawson," Thomas said, pushing his empty plate away with satisfaction. "Pearl tells me you have a ranch east of town. How many acres?" "Just over 2,000, sir. I have about 300 head of cattle and a small string of horses. It is not much compared to some of the big ranches in the territory, but it is mine free and clear, and it grows a little more each year." "A man who builds something from nothing is a man to be admired," Thomas said. "It takes real grit to make it out here. A lot of folks try and fail." "I have been fortunate," Samuel said. "The land is good, and I have a good foreman and a handful of reliable hands. We do all right." Thomas studied him for a long moment, and Samuel had the distinct feeling he was being evaluated for something more than just polite conversation. Finally, the older man said, "Well, we are deeply grateful for what you have done for Pearl. That locket means the world to her. Her mother, my dear wife Ruth, passed away 12 years ago, and there are days when I can barely remember her face. But Pearl looks so much like her that it is like having a little piece of Ruth still with us. Losing that portrait would have been like losing her all over again." "I understand, sir," Samuel said quietly. "I lost my own mother 2 years ago. The grief lessens with time, but it never truly goes away." "No, it does not," Thomas agreed, "but having good people around you helps. Good friends, good neighbors. Pearl and I have only been in Eager a few months, but folks here have been welcoming. It is a good town." They talked for a while longer, and then Samuel reluctantly said he needed to get back to his ranch. He had chores to oversee, even if his foreman was handling most of them. Pearl walked him down to the door, and at the last moment, before he stepped outside, she reached out and touched his arm. "Mr. Lawson, I truly cannot thank you enough. You did not have to search all night for my locket. Most people would have tried for an hour and then given up. But you kept your word and you found it. That kind of integrity is rare." "I could not stand to see you so heartbroken," Samuel said honestly. "I am just glad I was able to help." Pearl hesitated, then said in a rush, "Would you come to supper tomorrow evening, please? I would like to cook for you properly as a real thank you, and I would like to get to know you better." Samuel's heart hammered in his chest. "I would like that very much, Miss Johnston. Please call me Pearl. Only if you call me Samuel." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "All right, Samuel, tomorrow evening then. Around 6. I will be here," he promised. He retrieved his horse Ranger from the Johnston stable behind the Mercantile, mounted Silver, and rode back to his ranch with Ranger trailing on a lead rope. Despite his exhaustion, he felt more alive than he had in years. All he could think about was Pearl's smile, the way her eyes had lit up when he returned her locket, the way she had said his name. Back at the ranch, his foreman, a grizzled older man named Jake Cooper, took one look at him and shook his head. "You look like you have been dragged behind a horse, boss. What happened?" Samuel told him about Pearl's lost locket and his all-night search. Jake listened, then grinned, showing the gap where he had lost a tooth in a fight years ago. "So that is how it is it? You have finally noticed that pretty Johnston girl. Took you long enough." "It is not like that," Samuel protested, but even he could hear how weak the denial sounded. "Sure it is not," Jake said, still grinning. You just spent the whole night searching for a lost piece of jewelry out of the goodness of your heart. Had nothing to do with those pretty eyes or that smile of hers. Samuel felt his face heat. She invited me to supper tomorrow evening. Well, there you go. You best get some rest then. Cannot have you falling asleep in your plate in front of your lady. She is not my lady, Samuel said, but the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. He wanted her to be his lady. The realization was sudden and powerful. He barely knew Pearl Johnston, had only really spoken to her twice, but something about her had reached into his chest and grabbed hold of his heart. Not yet, maybe, Jake said. But mark my words, boss. This is the start of something. I can feel it in my bones. Samuel wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He went to his house, a modest 3-room building he had built himself with the help of his ranch hands, and collapsed into bed. He slept deeply and dreamlessly until late afternoon, then woke feeling refreshed despite the abbreviated sleep. He spent the rest of the day catching up on work around the ranch, but his mind kept drifting to Pearl and their upcoming supper. The next evening, Samuel took extra care with his appearance. He bathed thoroughly, shaved, and put on his best shirt and his newest pair of trousers. He even dug out the bottle of bay rum his sister had sent him for Christmas and splashed a little on his face. Jake saw him leaving and called out, "Good luck, boss. Do not do anything I would not do." Samuel rode into town as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. His stomach was full of butterflies, and he felt like a nervous schoolboy going to his first dance. When he knocked on the door of the Johnston living quarters, Pearl answered immediately, as if she had been waiting for him. She wore a different dress than yesterday, a soft green that matched her eyes, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken considerable time and effort. "Samuel, come in," she said warmly. "I am so glad you came." "I would not have missed it for the world," he replied honestly. The table was set beautifully with what were clearly the Johnstons' best dishes and a vase of wildflowers in the center. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, making Samuel's mouth water. Thomas Johnston was already seated, and he greeted Samuel with a friendly handshake. The meal was delicious. Pearl had made a pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh biscuits, and an apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, and Samuel found himself telling stories about his ranch and his life before coming to Arizona. He learned that Pearl and her father had lived in Missouri before coming west, that Pearl's mother had died of scarlet fever, and that Thomas had decided to start fresh somewhere new after years of struggling to keep their small farm afloat. "I always wanted to see the West," Pearl said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I read every book I could get my hands on about explorers and pioneers. When Father said we were moving to the Arizona Territory, I could hardly believe it. It has been even more beautiful than I imagined, though also harder. The heat took some getting used to." "It is not for everyone," Samuel agreed, "but I love it. There is something about this land that gets into your blood. The wide open spaces, the mountains, the way the sky seems to go on forever. I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." "I feel the same way," Pearl said softly, and when their eyes met across the table, Samuel felt that electric current again, stronger than before. After supper, Thomas excused himself, claiming he had paperwork to attend to in his room. It was an obvious ploy to give Samuel and Pearl time alone, and Samuel was grateful for it. They moved to the small sitting area by the window, where they could see the main street of Eager below, now quiet in the darkness except for the light spilling from the saloon. "I wanted to show you something," Pearl said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket. "I took it to the jeweler in town today. He repaired the chain and cleaned it. It looks like new again, thanks to you." She opened the locket and looked at the portrait inside. "My mother was only 32 when she died. I was 10, old enough to remember her clearly, but young enough that I fear I will forget as the years pass. This portrait is everything to me. It is proof that she existed, that she loved me, that I come from somewhere and someone." "You will not forget her," Samuel said gently. "She lives on in you. I can see it in the way you smile, the kindness in your eyes. A mother's love does not die with her body. It continues in the people she leaves behind." Pearl looked at him with such warmth that Samuel felt his breath catch. "That is a beautiful thing to say." "I mean it," Samuel said. "My mother taught me to be honest, to work hard, to treat people with respect. I carry her lessons with me every day. She is still alive in the way I live my life. Your mother is still alive in you the same way." Pearl reached out and took his hand, and Samuel's heart began to race. Her hand was small and soft in his calloused palm. "Thank you for understanding. Most people just tell me I need to move on, to stop dwelling on the past. But you understand that the past is part of who we are. It shapes us." "It does," Samuel agreed, "but it does not have to define us. We can honor our past while still building our future." They talked for hours, long after the town had gone quiet and the lights in the saloon had dimmed. Samuel learned that Pearl loved to raid, that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, that she missed the green forests of Missouri, but was learning to love the stark beauty of the desert. Pearl learned about Samuel's dreams of building his ranch into something that would last for generations, his close relationship with his sisters, his love of horses. When Samuel finally, reluctantly, said he needed to head back to his ranch, it was nearly midnight. Pearl walked him to the door, and they stood there in the doorway for a long moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. "May I see you again?" Samuel asked. "Not just in town, I mean, but properly. May I call on you?" Pearl's face lit up with joy. "I would like that very much. How about Sunday? I could take you on a picnic after church if the weather is good." "That sounds wonderful," Pearl said. Samuel wanted to kiss her goodnight, but it felt too soon, too forward. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture that made her blush and smile. "Good night, Pearl. Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Good night, Samuel. Thank you for searching until dawn." He rode home under a sky full of stars, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Jake was right. This was the start of something wonderful. The next few weeks passed in a blur of joy. Samuel courted Pearl properly, with Sunday picnics and evening suppers and long walks through town. He brought her wildflowers from his ranch, and she baked him cookies and pies. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's hopes and dreams, fears and sorrows. Thomas Johnston watched their courtship with approval, clearly pleased that his daughter had found such a solid, hard-working man. But not everyone in Eager was happy about their relationship. There was a man named Marcus Brennan who had been pursuing Pearl since shortly after she arrived in town. He was the son of the largest rancher in the area, wealthy and handsome, but also arrogant and quick to anger. He had assumed that Pearl would eventually accept his advances, and seeing her with Samuel had made him furious. One Saturday evening in late September, Samuel was leaving the mercantile after having supper with Pearl and Thomas when Marcus confronted him on the street. The sun had just set, and the street was mostly empty except for a few ranch hands heading into the saloon. "Lawson," Marcus said, his voice hard. "We need to talk." Samuel sighed. He had been expecting something like this. "What can I do for you, Brennan?" "You can stay away from Pearl Johnston," Marcus said bluntly. "She is too good for the likes of you. You are nothing but a dirt farmer with delusions of being a real rancher. My father owns 20,000 acres. I can give Pearl everything she could ever want. What can you offer her?" A tiny ranch and a life of back-breaking work. Samuel felt his temper flare, but he kept his voice level. What I can offer Pearl is not your concern, Brennan. It is between her and me, and from what I can tell, she has made her choice. Marcus stepped closer, his hands balling into fists. She only chose you because you played the hero, searching all night for that stupid locket. But heroics do not pay the bills, Lawson. She will realize soon enough that she made a mistake. If you have something to say to Pearl, say it to her, Samuel said evenly, but leave me out of it. I am not interested in your opinions. He turned to walk away, but Marcus grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. I am not done talking to you, Samuel knocked his hand away. Yes, you are. This conversation is over. For a moment, it looked like Marcus might throw a punch, but then Thomas Johnston emerged from the mercantile, attracted by the raised voices. Is there a problem here, gentlemen? Marcus stepped back, his face flushed with anger. No problem, Mr. Johnston. Lawson and I were just having a friendly chat, but I was telling him that Pearl deserves better than a small-time rancher who can barely make ends meet. Thomas looked at Marcus coolly. I will thank you not to make decisions for my daughter, Mr. Brennan. Pearl is perfectly capable of choosing her own suitors. And for the record, Samuel Lawson is a fine man who has been nothing but respectful and honorable in his courtship. That is worth more than all the land and money in the territory. Marcus looked between the two of them, his jaw tight with frustration. Then he turned on his heel and stalked off toward the saloon. Thomas watched him go, then turned to Samuel. That boy is trouble, he said quietly. His father spoiled him rotten, and he thinks he can have anything he wants. Be careful around him, Samuel. I will, sir, Samuel promised. The confrontation left a sour taste in Samuel's mouth, but he tried not to let it overshadow his happiness. He was falling in love with Pearl, truly and deeply, and he could tell she felt the same way about him. The way she looked at him, the way she smiled when he walked into a room, the way her hand felt in his, it all felt right in a way nothing else ever had. In early October, as the brutal summer heat finally began to ease and the nights turned cooler, Samuel decided it was time to take the next step. He wanted to marry Pearl, to build a life with her, to wake up every morning with her beside him. But he wanted to do it right, with a proper proposal. He spent days planning, trying to think of the perfect way to ask her. He wanted it to be special, memorable, something she would remember fondly for the rest of her life. Finally, he settled on an idea. He would take her back to the place where it had all started, the creek where she had lost her locket and where he had searched until dawn. That place would always be special to both of them, the place where their story began. On a beautiful Sunday afternoon, Samuel picked Pearl up in a small wagon he had borrowed and cleaned until it shone. He had packed a basket with all of Pearl's favorite foods, plus a bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion. Pearl was delighted by the surprise, and she chattered happily as they drove out to his ranch. When they arrived at the creek, Samuel helped her down from the wagon and led her to a shady spot beneath a large cottonwood tree. He had brought a blanket, and they sat down together, watching the water flow past. The cottonwood leaves had turned golden with the change of seasons, and they rustled gently in the breeze. It was peaceful and beautiful, and Samuel felt his nervousness ease slightly. They ate and talked and laughed, and then, as the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Samuel took Pearl's hand. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Pearl, he began, his voice shaking slightly. These past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Before I met you, I was content with my work, with building my ranch, but I was not truly happy. There was something missing, though I did not know what. And then I heard you crying that evening, and I found you by this creek, and everything changed. Pearl's eyes were shining as she listened, and she squeezed his hand encouragingly. "I love you," Samuel continued. "I love your kindness, your strength, your laugh, the way you see beauty in everything around you. I love how much you loved your mother, how much you love your father. I love who I am when I am with you. You make me want to be better, to build something not just for myself but for us. For a future together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond, nothing fancy, but the best he could afford. He had saved for weeks to buy it. "Pearl Johnston, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I know I cannot offer you riches or a fancy house, not yet anyway, but I can offer you my whole heart, my loyalty, my devotion. I promise to work every day to make you happy, to build a life with you that is full of love and joy. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Pearl's face, but she was smiling through them. "Yes, yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I love you so much. I do not care about riches or fancy houses. All I want is you, a life with you." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking with emotion, and then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, and it was perfect, full of love and promise and hope for the future. When they finally broke apart, they were both crying and laughing at the same time. "When?" Pearl asked breathlessly. "When should we get married?" "As soon as you like," Samuel said. "Tomorrow, if you want. I do not want to wait any longer than I have to," Pearl laughed. "Let us give it a few weeks at least. I want time to make a dress, and we should have a proper celebration. But not too long. Maybe the end of October." "The end of October sounds perfect," Samuel agreed. They sat beneath the cottonwood tree as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans for their future. They would live on Samuel's ranch at first, and Pearl would help him build it into something even greater. Eventually, they would build a larger house, one big enough for the children they both hoped to have. Pearl would keep helping her father with the mercantile when she could, at least until he was ready to retire or hire full-time help. When Samuel finally drove Pearl back to town that evening, they were both giddy with happiness. Thomas took one look at his daughter's glowing face and the ring on her finger, and he swept her up in a tight hug. "I am so happy for you, my dear," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Samuel is a good man, and I know he will take care of you. Your mother would be so proud." "I wish she could be here," Pearl said softly. "She is," Thomas assured her. "She is always with you, watching over you, and she is smiling right now, I am certain of it." The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Pearl worked on her wedding dress with help from some of the other women in town, and Samuel worked on fixing up his house to make it more suitable for a wife. He added curtains to the windows, built new furniture, and even painted the walls. Jake and the other ranch hands helped, teasing him good-naturedly about becoming a married man. Marcus Brennan, true to form, was not gracious about the engagement. He made snide comments whenever he saw Samuel in town, and he tried several times to convince Pearl to reconsider. But Pearl made it clear she had no interest in him, and eventually he seemed to accept defeat, though Samuel noticed he still glared whenever they crossed paths. The wedding took place on the last Sunday of October in the small church in Eager. It was a simple ceremony, but beautiful. Pearl wore a cream-colored dress she had made herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Samuel wore his best suit, and his hands shook as he slipped the wedding band onto Pearl's finger. The whole town seemed to turn out for the celebration, which was held in the church hall. There was music and dancing, and Thomas had spared no expense on the food. Samuel's foreman Jake gave a rambling, slightly inappropriate toast that made everyone laugh. and Thomas spoke movingly about his joy at gaining a son-in-law he respected and admired. But the best moment of the day, the one Samuel knew he would remember forever, was when he and Pearl finally left the celebration and rode out to the ranch together as husband and wife. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Pearl rested her head on his shoulder as they drove. "I cannot believe this is real," she whispered. "I cannot believe I get to spend the rest of my life with you." "Believe it," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "You are stuck with me now, Mrs. Lawson." Pearl laughed, and the sound was like music. "I love the sound of that, Mrs. Lawson. I am Pearl Lawson now." "The most beautiful name in the world," Samuel said. Their first night together as husband and wife was tender and wonderful, full of love and nervous laughter and whispered promises. And when Samuel woke the next morning with Pearl in his arms, her hair spread across his chest, he felt a contentment so deep and complete that it almost frightened him. He had everything he had ever wanted, and he vowed to himself that he would never take it for granted. The first few months of their marriage were an adjustment, as any new marriage is. Pearl had to get used to life on a ranch, which was very different from living above a mercantile in town. The work was hard and never-ending, but she threw herself into it with enthusiasm. She learned to cook for the ranch hands, to tend a garden, to help with the horses. She had a natural way with animals, and Samuel loved watching her work. For his part, Samuel had to adjust to sharing his space, his life, his home with someone else. He had been on his own for so long that having Pearl there all the time felt strange at first. But it was a good kind of strange, the kind that made even ordinary moments feel special. Coming in from a long day of work to find Pearl waiting for him, sitting down to supper together, falling asleep with her in his arms every night. It was everything he had never known he was missing. Thomas visited often, usually on Sundays after church, and he was always welcomed warmly. Samuel could see how much it meant to Pearl to have her father close, and he was glad they had not moved too far away for regular visits. As winter set in, and the year turned to 1884, Samuel and Pearl settled into a comfortable routine. They worked hard during the day and spent their evenings together, talking and reading and planning for the future. Pearl proved to have a good head for business, and she helped Samuel make decisions about the ranch that increased their profitability. By spring, they had enough saved to buy another 100 head of cattle and hire an additional ranch hand. In April, Pearl came to Samuel with news that made his heart soar. She was expecting a child. They cried together, overwhelmed with joy and gratitude. Samuel immediately became overprotective, insisting that Pearl rest more and not work too hard. Pearl laughed at his concern but secretly loved how much he cared. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Pearl bloomed with health. Her belly grew round, and Samuel would lie with his hand on it at night, feeling their baby move. They talked endlessly about names and what kind of parents they wanted to be. Thomas was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and he began making a cradle for his grandchild with his own hands. In late November of 1884, after a long labor that left Samuel pacing and praying, Pearl gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Samuel Lawson, after both their fathers. Samuel held his son for the first time and wept openly, overwhelmed by the fierce love he felt for this tiny, perfect human being. Pearl, exhausted but radiant, watched them with tears of joy streaming down her face. "He is beautiful," Samuel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." "I love you too," Pearl said. "More than words can say." Little Thomas, or Tommy as they called him, was a happy baby, all chubby cheeks and bright eyes. Samuel was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, rocking his son to sleep, singing to him in his off-key voice. Pearl would watch them together and feel her heart overflow with love. As Tommy grew from baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's hard work and Pearl's business sense proved to be a winning combination. They expanded slowly but steadily, always being careful not to overextend themselves. By the time Tommy was 3, they had saved enough to start building the larger house they had dreamed of. It took most of a year to complete, but when it was finished, it was everything they had hoped for. A solid 2-story house with 5 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a formal dining room, and a wide front porch perfect for sitting and watching the sunset. Pearl cried when they moved in, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that night by the creek when she had lost her locket. The locket. She still wore it every day, never taking it off except to sleep. It had become more than just a memory of her mother. It was also a reminder of how she and Samuel had come together, of the night he had searched until dawn, of the love that had grown from that act of kindness. In the spring of 1888, Pearl gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Ruth Pearl Lawson, after Pearl's mother. Ruth had her mother's auburn hair and her father's brown eyes, and she was as spirited as her brother was calm. Samuel adored her, and Pearl often teased him about being wrapped around their daughter's tiny finger. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Samuel and Pearl's love for each other only deepened with time. They had their challenges, of course. There were droughts that strained the cattle, harsh winters that tested their endurance, and the occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers over water rights or grazing land. But they faced everything together, as partners, and that made all the difference. Thomas Johnston remained a constant presence in their lives until he passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1891. He was 72 years old and had lived long enough to see his grandchildren growing up strong and healthy. Pearl grieved deeply for her father, but she took comfort in knowing he had died happy, surrounded by family and love. They buried him in the Eager Cemetery next to the plot they had reserved for Pearl's mother, even though Ruth was buried back in Missouri. It seemed right to have a place to honor her memory there in Arizona, where her daughter had built such a beautiful life. After Thomas's death, Samuel and Pearl took over the mercantile, hiring a manager to run it day to day but keeping ownership in the family. It provided a steady income separate from the ranch and became a legacy they could pass down to their children. As the 1890s progressed, Tommy grew into a responsible young man who loved ranch work and showed every sign of being an excellent cattleman like his father. Ruth grew into a bright, curious girl who loved books and learning, much like her mother. In 1895, Pearl gave birth to their third child, another son they named James Samuel Lawson. James was a surprise, coming when Pearl was 34 and they had assumed their family was complete. But he was a welcome addition, full of energy and mischief. Samuel was now in his late 30s, and while his body sometimes ached from the hard work, he had never been happier. He had built something lasting, something that would survive long after he was gone. He had a wife who was his best friend and greatest love, children who made him proud every day, and land that stretched as far as the eye could see. On a cool evening in October of 1898, 15 years almost to the day after he had first found Pearl's locket, Samuel and Pearl sat together on the porch of their big house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside doing their homework, and the ranch was quiet except for the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. Pearl leaned against Samuel's shoulder, her hand in his, and sighed contentedly. "You ever think about that night, the night you searched until dawn?" All the time, Samuel admitted. It was the night that changed my life. If I had not heard you crying, if I had not stopped to help, we might never have found our way to each other. I think we would have, Pearl said. Somehow, someway, we were meant to be together. I truly believe that. Samuel kissed the top of her head. I believe it too. You are my heart, Pearl. You and the children. Everything good in my life started with you. Pearl lifted her face to his and they kissed, their love as strong and sweet as it had been on their wedding day. After all these years, after all the challenges and triumphs, the joy and sorrow, they were still each other's greatest adventure. I love you, Samuel Lawson, Pearl whispered against his lips. I love you, Pearl Lawson, he whispered back, until my last breath and beyond. As the years continued to pass, the Lawson Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Tommy took on more and more responsibility, showing a natural talent for ranch management. By the time he was 21, he was essentially running the day-to-day operations, allowing Samuel to step back and enjoy life a little more. Ruth, now a beautiful young woman of 16, had announced her intention to become a teacher, and Samuel and Pearl supported her fully, even though it meant she would need to go away to normal school. James, the youngest, was only 8 but already showing signs of being the most adventurous of the 3 children. He was constantly exploring, always coming home with scraped knees and tall tales of his adventures. Samuel saw himself in James, remembered his own restless youth before he had found his purpose in ranching. In the summer of 1900, Tommy met a young woman named Sarah Miller, whose family had recently moved to the area. She was sweet and hardworking, the daughter of a farmer, and Tommy was smitten immediately. Samuel watched his son court Sarah with the same earnest devotion he had shown Pearl all those years ago, and his heart swelled with pride. Tommy proposed in the fall, and they were married the following spring in a beautiful ceremony that reminded Samuel and Pearl of their own wedding. Tommy and Sarah built a house on the far side of the ranch property, close enough to be part of the family operation but far enough to have their own space. In 1902, they gave Samuel and Pearl their first grandchild, a boy they named Samuel Thomas Lawson. Holding his grandson for the first time, seeing his name carried forward to a new generation, Samuel felt a profound sense of completion. He had built something that would last, a legacy of love and hard work that would continue long after he was gone. Ruth went off to normal school in Flagstaff in the fall of 1902, and while Pearl missed her daughter terribly, she was immensely proud of Ruth's determination to follow her dreams. Ruth wrote long letters home, full of details about her classes and her new friends, and Pearl wrote back just as faithfully, keeping her daughter connected to home even as she spread her wings. James grew into a strapping young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick wit and warm heart. He eventually decided he wanted to work with horses more than cattle, and Samuel helped him establish a horse breeding program on the ranch that proved quite successful. As Samuel entered his 50s, he began to slow down a bit. His back ached more often, and he found himself content to supervise rather than do all the physical labor himself. But he was healthy and happy, surrounded by family and the fruits of his lifelong labor. In 1910, Ruth returned home from teaching in Flagstaff with a young man in tow, a fellow teacher named David Harrison. They were engaged to be married, and Ruth was glowing with happiness. The wedding was held at the ranch in the summer, and it was a grand affair with half the territory in attendance. Samuel walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his face, remembering the tiny baby girl he had held 22 years before. Ruth and David settled in Eager, where they both taught at the local school. They had 3 children in quick succession, adding more grandchildren for Samuel and Pearl to dote on. James eventually married as well, to a spirited young woman named Claire who loved horses as much as he did. They built their house near Tommy's, and the ranch became a true family compound, multiple generations working and living together in harmony. Through it all, through every triumph and challenge, every joy and sorrow, Samuel and Pearl remained devoted to each other. Their love, which had begun with a lost locket and a night-long search, had grown and deepened into something unshakable. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good-night every evening, still looked at each other with the same affection and admiration they had felt in those early days. On their 30th wedding anniversary in October of 1913, their children and grandchildren threw them a huge celebration at the ranch. People came from all over the territory to honor Samuel and Pearl Lawson, respected for their integrity, generosity, and devotion to community. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and more food than anyone could possibly eat. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Pearl snuck away from the celebration for a moment of privacy. They walked hand in hand down to the creek, to the spot beneath the cottonwood tree where Samuel had proposed so many years before. The tree was much larger now, its trunk thick and strong, its branches spreading wide. It had been there when their story began, and it would be there long after they were gone, a silent witness to their love. 30 years, Pearl said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and forever all at once. The best 30 years of my life, Samuel said. He pulled her into his arms and held her close. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as it was with you. Pearl looked up at him, her eyes still bright and beautiful, though now lined with age. Do you remember what you said to me when you proposed? You said you would work every day to make me happy. You have kept that promise, Samuel. Every single day. It was easy, Samuel said. Making you happy makes me happy. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. They kissed beneath the cottonwood tree as the sun painted the sky in glorious colors. Two people who had built a beautiful life from a moment of kindness and compassion. Their love story had started with tears and a lost locket, but it had bloomed into something magnificent. A testament to the power of love, commitment, and partnership. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, they could hear the sounds of their family celebrating. Multiple generations gathered together in love and joy. This was their legacy, not just the land and the cattle and the houses, but the love they had created and nurtured, the family they had built, the example they had set. Samuel and Pearl lived many more good years together. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. They saw the ranch continue to prosper under Tommy's careful management. They attended Ruth's school plays and poetry readings. They helped James develop his horse breeding program into one of the best in the territory. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925 at the age of 68, Pearl beside him as she had been for 42 years of marriage. His last words were, "I love you," spoken to the woman who had been his partner, his best friend, his everything. Pearl held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart was shattered, she took comfort in knowing they had lived a beautiful life together, full of more love and happiness than most people ever dream of. Pearl lived another 7 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them loving her and caring for her with the same devotion she had shown them throughout their lives. She wore her mother's locket every single day until the very end, and inside it, along with the portrait of Ruth, she had placed a tiny photograph of Samuel, so that her two greatest loves were always close to her heart. when Pearl passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1932. At the age of 71, her family buried her next to Samuel in the Eager Cemetery. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, they inscribed a simple line that captured the essence of her life and love. She was loved, and she loved deeply in return. The Lawson Ranch continued for many more generations, passed down through Tommy's line. The house Samuel and Pearl had built still stood strong, and their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The cottonwood tree by the creek grew even larger and more majestic, and it became tradition for Lawson family members to propose to their loves beneath its branches, honoring Samuel and Pearl's legacy. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could feel the presence of two souls still walking hand in hand by the creek, their love so powerful that not even death could diminish it. The story of the rancher who searched until dawn for a lost locket, and the woman who cried over it, became a testament to the enduring power of love, kindness, and devotion. It was a reminder that the smallest acts of compassion can change lives, that love built on mutual respect and partnership can weather any storm, and that true love never really dies, but lives on in the hearts and memories of those left behind. The locket itself became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through the generations to the firstborn daughter in each line. Each woman who wore it added her own story to its history, but none of them ever forgot the original story, the one about Pearl and Samuel, and a night-long search that led to a lifetime of love. It remained a symbol of enduring love, of the bonds between mothers and daughters, of the power of persistence and devotion. And so the story of Samuel and Pearl Lawson lived on, a beautiful reminder that real love, true love, the kind of love that lasts forever, often begins with a simple act of kindness, a willingness to search through the darkness until dawn breaks, and the courage to open your heart to another person completely. Their love story had started with tears and loss, but it had transformed into something magnificent, a testament to the power of love to heal, to strengthen, and to endure through all things. In the end, that was their greatest legacy, not the land or the wealth or even the family they had created, but the example they set of how to love fully, completely, and forever. It was a legacy that touched countless lives and continued to inspire long after they were gone. A love story for the ages, born in the Wild West but eternal in its message and meaning.